Don't worry.
No. So let us jump in and just see how it goes, right? All right. The important piece right now is the blessing.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, I need you, by the way, to mute.
I will, but that is beautiful.
You like that one?
I
Okay.
do. Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, the ancient scroll and a reminder that we bless the Holy One when we do things that have meaning, when we want to create sanctity out of an activity. And so, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And as you know me to emphasize, la'asok, the onomatopoeia of the English, right? To soak it up. So this is a moment to soak up the words of the Torah. And for many people, that means it's the mind of the Holy One. So, as I said a few minutes ago, Vayeirah covers a lot of ground. It covers from the circumcision and Avraham at the opening of the tent. He's probably in some pain, and immediately it says that God appeared before him. We don't know if that's a vision or a meditation, which some believe. But it opens with this connection between him and God, and we're going to focus on the end of the portion, which is another connection with God. And the Akeidah literally means the binding of Isaac. And I feel that there are some important lessons for all of us in this story. And just as a reminder, this is a young man. Some people say he's a teen. Some people say he's 37 years old, which I'll talk about the meaning of that in a minute. They're getting their stuff together. Avraham is getting the wood because it's going to be the building of a fire. He has his son, and they're going to travel. So this is just a little bit of a reminder visually. And then, of course, when we get towards the climax, Avraham has the knife, and the angel comes to stop him. This is just another rendering of the angel coming to prevent Avraham to do the deed, which he seems very prepared to do. In the story, however, we meet another kind of Avraham, and this is before the Akeidah. This is him before the event at Sodom and Gomorrah, where he is literally arguing and pleading and confronting God, right? He's saying, how can you do this? There must be some righteous people there. And if there are, it would be totally inappropriate and offensive to literally kill everybody. So I wanted you to see this image that an artist rendered of the strength of Avraham really confronting God. This is something we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing and just talk to you a little bit about thoughts, just how we can think about this story, which is very heavy. It's very painful, and there are a number of textual responses and commentaries that I want to share. What we know about Avraham from the very beginning is that he is a fighter. He fights truly. He does not approve of idol worship and child sacrifice. This is what becomes so important about his presence and who he is, and maybe why God chooses him. So he's willing to challenge his own father, which is so interesting, about the whole concept of idol worship, because you remember the story when his father goes on a trip, vacation, he leaves his son in charge, and Avraham uses that opportunity to destroy all the idols but one, puts a stick in that one idol, and he basically is saying, that's the one that's responsible for this. And of course, his father in the Midrash says that's not possible. He doesn't believe it. But Avraham is willing to challenge his father. So we have a person immediately who's a challenger, who doesn't accept the status quo, and definitely does not accept this idea of sacrificing children. He's a man who's committed to converting these people who may have accepted those values and to bring them into the fold, into the belief and the following of one God, which includes laws for humanity that go back to Noah, the Noahide laws. So in some ways, this story makes no sense based on who he was, what he just did in Sodom within, the Torah portion. And so I'm just going to express, I've written down some notes about some thoughts that the sages have expressed. One in particular is interesting, that this story isn't even real. Maybe it didn't even happen. Maybe there was a purpose in writing it down because there was some kind of teaching, a teachable moment that may have been important. It feels so unreal given who Avraham is. And of course, as we just said, he fought God at Sodom. He couldn't accept that kind of value of just destroying everything in God's midst that was considered evil, but perhaps there's some good people in their midst. So do we destroy everything, or are we a little more selective? It seems also a little bit out of character for God, in a way. The fact that he's willing to ask Avraham to sacrifice his son just feels totally out of character with the value of life, and promising that Isaac, was going to be the future, and through him, we would all come into being, the people. It just somehow doesn't make any sense. At the end of the story, God never talks to Abraham again. They never have a conversation. And Avraham goes one way, Isaac goes another. We don't even hear Isaac until a little bit later. And of course, we have Sarah's death, which follows. The whole thing, just the story itself is so disturbing. There is, the Midrash that Satan, who we call an accuser, a troublemaker, says to her, he's dead, and your husband did it. And she just collapses, has a heart attack. She can't tolerate hearing that. Of course, it's not true. But the very next thing that happens is that she dies. There is a statement in the Mishnah that Avraham passed 10 tests, and this is the big one. The question is that somebody raised in my readings, in my contemporary readings, is when you pass a test, you can get a C or you can get an A+. So did Avraham get an A+, or did he get a C? He may have passed the test, but how well did he pass it? And then in another piece of commentary, the rabbis share something from Jeremiah, who's quoting God. So let me read it to you. They have built altars. This is for Baal, for this, the god of the idols, to burn their sons and daughters with fire for burnt offerings, which I did not command. This is God speaking. I did not command, nor did I speak it, nor did it come from my lave, my heart. And sometimes that's translated as my mind, because in ancient times, there was no difference between the heart and the mind. So the rabbis are quoting a statement that even God says, this is impossible. I would never command this. I would never instruct this. So then the question is, perhaps Avraham misunderstood what God is saying to him, because in the instructions, he doesn't say slaughter or kill your son. He says, where's the word? I wrote it down. He uses the word from Allah. I'm just looking for the actual quote. Sentence bet. Vayomer kachna et bincha, take your son et yechidcha, your only one, asher ahava, the one that you absolutely love, et yitzchak, no confusion, v'lech lecha, and take him, el eretz hamoria, and then it says v'ha'alahu. V'ha'alahu. In other words, the verb and the root is to lift up. That's in essence what it's saying. So maybe Avraham really misunderstood the directions, because if you read it literally, lift up your son, elevate him, don't kill him, don't slaughter him, as a le'olah, which of course we know is a burnt offering, but you know, it could have been a metaphor. It could have been, of course, it is the test of how Avraham hears this and what Avraham interprets. Moses, when you remember the story of the golden calf, even though the people have really sinned, he begs God, and he, you know, on their behalf, to have some compassion, maybe to understand the situation. Moses was gone for 40 days. They did the unthinkable. But he begs God to have a little bit of compassion and not destroy everybody. And he says, if you won't do this, erase me from your book. If you're actually going to try to destroy everybody for their sin, erase me from your book. And Avraham in that moment could have done the same thing. Is it because he's a father and less removed from bringing life into the world? Would a mother, when confronted by a request, take your child and offer them up? Would a mother say, no way, take me? Avraham doesn't say, take me. Avraham just does what he's told. So, you know, we have so many different ways of understanding what's happening, and maybe to look at it a little differently. What I want to share with you, let's go back to this picture, and then we're going to read something which is a very interesting commentary on God's power and God's voice after Sinai. So I want to share something. It's a story in Talmud. You know, it's not like a fable. It's the rabbis relating something that occurs. And I think it's very important to kind of look at it in the context of God's voice, which is what Avraham is listening to. It's called Tanur Achnei's oven. It is the oven that looks like this. It's actually coiled, and they refer to it as kind of the serpent's oven. It's a story about what happens if you have to take it apart and move it and put it in another location. And it seems, according to this picture, that somewhere on Masada they found something that actually looked very much like this. And so there is a discussion, and what I want to do now is go to the discussion, because I've never really taught this to you, and it's a fascinating reality. So in the story, we have two rabbis who are central. Rabbi Eliezer, who's a great sage, he basically says, if you do this, take it apart and move it, you know what? It's not kosher anymore. It's lost its purity, it's defiled, and you can't use it. And then we have another rabbi, Yehoshua, who says, no, I don't agree. I think, you put it back together. Maybe they do a blessing. I don't know. It's not part of the discussion. But his perception is, no, it's fine. You can use it. And most of the rabbis who are involved in this discussion all agree with him. And poor Rabbi Eliezer, the great sage, is on the outs. And here is a discussion which I want to share because it's kind of fun and interesting. So he's trying to convince them that God is on his side, and I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to prove I'm right. So he says to the other rabbis, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, then I'm going to prove it. How? The first way is that this carob tree is going to prove it. The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. And the rabbis say to him, one does not cite proof from a carob tree. How is that proof? Rabbi Eliezer then says to them, well, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, something else is going to happen to prove it. This stream out here is going to show you, it's going to do something. The water in the stream is going to turn backward. You just watch. It's going to do something miraculous. And they say to him, one does not cite proof from a stream. Rabbi Eliezer then says to them, well, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, right? He keeps trying to prove that these miracles are going to happen, which he believes God has a hand in. The walls of the study hall that we're in, it's going to prove it. And he says the walls of the study hall are going to lean as if they're going to fall. So Rabbi Yehoshua, right, the opposition, he scolds the walls and he says, if the Torah scholars are contending with each in matters of halakha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? Like, why walls? Do you have anything to do with this? And therefore, what happens? The walls don't fall. In deference, I should say, to Rabbi Yehoshua. But they did not straighten because of deference to Rabbi Eliezer. They're leaning slightly, but they don't fall over. So Rabbi Eliezer then says to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, then heaven is going to prove it. I'm going to show you. A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? In other words, he is so well respected. He has so much wisdom. As the halakha is in accordance in every place with him. So in this moment, a voice, what we call a bat kol, comes out and is saying, hey, you guys, what are you doing? This is the master. Rabbi Yehoshua stood up and he says, and this is a quote that actually is from Deuteronomy, where it says, Lo v'shamayim hi. It is not in heaven. In other words, Rabbi Yehoshua and the other rabbis are sitting there and they're saying, hey, this isn't for God. This is not for heaven to interfere. Rabbi Yirmiyahu, so they bring another citation in, another rabbi, and he says that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. We do not regard a divine voice, as you already heard it. The Torah was written at Mount Sinai after a majority to incline. So, this is like there's the minority opinion and the majority opinion. And he's saying, you know what? It's the majority that should decide this, not you, Rabbi Eliezer. And then they quote this story where Rabbi Natan has a meeting with Elijah and says to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that moment when all this is really happening? When Rabbi Yehoshua issued this declaration that it's not in heaven. And Elijah says to him, oh, he smiled. And he said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. And when this ends, Rabbi Eliezer is actually excommunicated. The point of sharing this at this moment is a little bit of reference to what is happening with Avraham. He could have easily have said, wait a minute, a decision such as this, being asked to take my son and to sacrifice him, that shouldn't come from heaven. It shouldn't come from God. I mean, we've been given laws. We have the mitzvot to guide us, though, of course, in Avraham's time, Torah wasn't written yet. But his relationship with God is very clear. It is based on righteousness and humanity. And so I wanted to share that with you because it really points out that once the Talmudic area, let's start with Mishnah, the Mishnaic era comes to be at the end of the destruction of the temple, they have a Torah, which they believe comes from Sinai, but it's up to them now to interpret and speak from the world, from humanity and the human's wisdom, and it's no longer up to God. So I thought it was an interesting thing to share and for you to think about, that no longer is it the heavenly voice that speaks in the world. The story of Jacob is another way to interpret what God finally says, and that's when he changes his name, Yaakov, to Yisrael. He's basically saying, you know what? You argued with me. You wrestled with me. You questioned and demanded to be blessed. Therefore, you're getting the name. So one has to question, did Avraham somehow lose out in that kind of blessing and the gift somehow of acknowledging, you know what, did Avraham really do the right thing? That's part of what we're looking at. I want to share a commentary from Nechama Leibowitz, who was a teacher of Israel. She's no longer with us, but she says, because remember, this is considered a test. Tests or trials are not meant to prove anything to God, because God's all-knowing. Why is this a test in relationship to God? This is actually a test or a trial to improve the character of the person who's being tried. And this is one of the things I want to focus on at the end when we have our meditation. And she quotes, happy is the human who withstands his or her trial. Since there is no creature whom the Holy One, blessed be he, does not try. We all are tried at one time in our lives. She says the rich man is tried to see if his hand is open to the poor, and the poor man is tried to see if he can bear his suffering without complaint. So the question is, does Avraham really face his trial, and does he pass the test? For Rambam, it's one of the ways he likes to say this is perhaps truly happening, that it's not real. Because he says if there are angels present in the story, right, because the angel comes to prevent Avraham from killing his son, if there's an angel in the story, it's got to be a dream or a prophetic vision. If an angel is present in the story, like Jacob's ladder, or perhaps the wrestling match, maybe that was a vision and a dream, although it does say it's an ish, a man, not an angel. So was this actually real? Was it a real trial? Was it a real test? And maybe it wasn't even a test for Avraham, it was a test for Isaac. Targum Yonatan says that it was a proof of his devotion to God, and that he was more deserving than his half-brother Ishmael. He is supposed to be either a teen or 37 years old, which in and of itself is interesting. Why is it interesting? Because the Zohar takes another point of view. The Zohar says it's a tikkun. The whole thing is a tikkun for something that happened at the beginning. After Adam and Eve leave the garden, and Cain, as you know, there are two sons, and Cain kills Abel. What's interesting is that his Hebrew name, Havel, the gematria is 37. So the rabbis make this connection between Hevel, who's 37, Isaac, who's 37, and that perhaps this whole story was a tikkun because Abel is killed and Cain brings into the world murder, right? Endless bloodshed, which we know exists up until this time. So it's kind of an interesting Zoharic way to look at the whole story. That something of Isaac is really to redeem the horrific murder that occurred, generations ago. And there is these words in Hebrew. Where is it? Did I write it? Haseh leolah beni. It's when Isaac asks, like, where's the lamb? You're going to do the sacrifice? Where's the lamb? And basically Avraham says, well, God's going to handle that, and you can read that sentence to say, the lamb for the offering is my son. You can reread it that the lamb will be an offering because God's going to bring it, my son. Or the lamb for the offering is my son. So that's a very different reading of what those words mean. Yitzchak is his Hebrew name. And if you move the letters around, it says Ketzchai. In the end, which comes out of this idea in Kabbalah from Sefer Yetzirah, the end is in the beginning. The beginning is in the end. So the end of the story, according to this interpretation, is that somehow there'll be a redemption for Isaac. He will be resurrected as a result of his willingness to give his life for God. So it's a very interesting concept that the end is in the beginning. If each one of us looked at our lives, at the very beginning of our lives, is there something, if we were to review it, could we see a promise of something that would happen years later, that the end is somehow in the beginning of our birth, our childhood, our lives within our families? What are the messages in the end that come from the story of how our lives begin? When I think of myself as a child of Holocaust survivors and coming out of the darkness, I was one of the first born in Sweden in this community where many women actually were saved and taken to Stockholm to heal. And my father came and found my mother, and I was born there, and one of the first babies to be celebrated for life. Is that the message? Is there something in that birth and message that is, a message for me of how things come later on in their end? Is it something about the darkness, the pain, and the suffering that I carry because of the DNA, the way we carry in our cells the things that come from our families? So there are a lot of questions that come up around this personally, but before we go there and meditate on it, I wanted to share some text with you, commentary. And let's pull it over. It's right here. So these are actually right from Sepharia that has this abundant openness of sharing text. Some of it is commentary, midrash, some of it comes right from Talmud, but I wanted to share with you this Kli Yakar. I can't remember if he's 16th, 17th, 18th century commentator. He's later, and he says, he's quoting, and he said father. This is Isaac. He's saying father to Avraham. But Yitzhak had not yet said anything to him. He was silent so far, and rather just called him father and then was quiet. This was because Yitzhak felt that it was his father's will to sacrifice him as a burnt offering. So he's suggesting he knew this and he understood it. So he thought, if that's what his father's going to do, he does not have mercy upon me, like the mercy of a father upon his children, and has become cruel towards me. So this commentator is saying that what Yitzhak is sensing is that his father in some way doesn't really love him. He is showing cruelty. He's not acting like a parent. I think this is just incredible. And that his calling out father is trying to remind him, you're my dad. You're my father. What's going on here? So I just thought this was kind of an interesting take. But let's look at what Talmud says. In Ta'anit, it is written with regard to human sacrifice. And this is what I had mentioned earlier. And they have built, and this is the Jeremiah text, right? That they were building for Baal these high places, and they were actually going to sacrifice sons, daughters, as burnt offerings. And Talmud is reminding everyone, God did not command this. God did not speak it. It wasn't even in God's heart, because the Hebrew is leiv. The Gemara interprets each phrase of this verse and looks at each phrase and is trying to remind people that this is really coming literally from God. So this is a midrash, an early midrash. Isaac says to his father Avraham, "O my father, bind for me my two hands and my 2 feet, so I do not curse you." For instance, a word may issue from the mouth because of the violence and the dread of death, and I shall be found to have slighted the precept, honor thy father. So he's saying, the mitzvah is to honor the father. If you don't bind me up really well, I'm going to get loose. Something's going to happen. So again, the ministering angels cry out, behold, cry, the angels of peace weep bitterly. The ministering angel said before the Holy One, sovereign of all worlds, thou art called merciful and compassionate, whose mercy is upon all his works. Have mercy upon Isaac, for he's a human being and the son of a human being, but you're binding him up like an animal. This is a confrontation of how could God do this. Just a reminder as well, on Rosh Hashanah, when we blow the shofar, it comes for the rabbis out of this story. We need to blast the shofar as a remembrance that God eventually, is it because of the angels? Is it because he never intended it? God never intended it at all. But the ram is a replacement for Isaac, and because of that, the shofar, their horn, is a reminder at Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the new year and the birth of the human being, that this is not okay. This was not okay. So let me stop sharing and come back to you. And let's go to a different gallery view before I raised some questions about how to view this for ourselves. What are the questions we need to ask so this really becomes something we can relate to, whether it's a story of a man, a father and a son, God's role in our lives. But given what we've looked at, does anybody have any commentary, any questions, statements? What is a trigger for you, all that we looked at? Anything? Robin? Yep, you're still muted. It's still muted. There is a button there for the microphone. Do you see it? Yeah, this isn't usually a problem for you. You're still silent to us. Can't figure out which button. Let's see. Can I unmute everybody?
I got it.
Yes,
Okay.
you
You
can.
got it. Go ahead.
I got it. So it's what you said is all swirling around in my brain. It's all very confrontational and confusing. But the piece that toward the end about the sacrificing, we as parents sacrifice ourselves for our children. We do not sacrifice our children for ourselves. That's the main piece that I pull out of it. That your parents sacrificed for you to be able to live in this country. My father sacrificed by working himself to death practically so he could bring us live in a house and have put food on the table. Kids don't sacrifice for their parents.
Well, amen to that. I'm sure there are families in which they do, sadly, and those are the people who probably end up with a great deal of anger and a need to express it in some of the horrible ways that we see in the world because they were sacrificed and not treated as you describe, because that's really the goal, right? For
We ask why do the people in the Middle East sacrifice their children to be bombs, to be walking around with bombs on their bodies and walk into some place and explode? Why is that okay?
yeah, exactly. I mean, where does that come from? That mentality of a parent who feels in their devotion to whatever they value or believe that it's worth sacrificing the people, the children, in order to make a point. It's basically, what it does. It makes a point. Yeah, Maya, did you want to say something?
To the last point, I'll just say for that, Robin, I think we all got the answer from Golda Meir. They hate Jews more than they love their kids. So that's simple. But that's how I see. That's how I truly believe she was a genius in that. But going back to what Eva, you were talking about, it's all mystical for me and spiritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised to hear that Abraham could misinterpret
Mm-hmm.
what he was told by God. I don't really think that it was possible. I was thinking in my brain that he didn't misinterpret because he was discussing with God, right? That's what you mentioned, that he was not really discussing. He was trying to ask him not to. I don't know. Something in my mind. I think that he didn't misinterpret, and that was kind of test for him. So it's unfortunate that the test was such a cruel thing.
Well, the question, let me raise a few questions and
Okay.
just in response, what I pointed out is that it was out of character for him most of his life. He challenged. That was part of what made Avraham who he was. It's part of why he was chosen. He challenged the whole world that surrounded him, these idol worshippers. And then when God wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, or specifically focus on Sodom, he basically says, wait a minute, if there's 50 people, 20 people, 10 people who are righteous and good, you're going to do this? And then we have this total turnaround in this ending story. It all sort of happens in this Parshah, right? From the beginning when he's suffering, we assume, somewhat from his circumcision and has a vision or has a visitor from God, as well as these other three men who are interpreted as being angels and who go to do the deed in Sodom. But it's such a switch of character. He's certainly older, and I guess it raises a lot of different questions. And it may have been a very minority opinion that he misinterpreted, but I just wanted to share you all the possibilities of rabbis, how they viewed this and saw this. But it raises so many different questions. In his old age, did he weaken was his soul weaker in terms of his willingness to fight? We see all these senior citizens who came out on the No Kings Walk, right? Despite their age, they came because they had fight in them. And Avraham doesn't seem to have fight in him anymore. He doesn't challenge God, he just does it. On the other hand, it's viewed very traditionally as because of his devotion to God, he was willing to do whatever God asked. And the question for us, I have some questions. Are we learning something to do? Are we learning something not to do? Is an important question. Is this a teachable moment? Is it in Torah to remind us, hey, wake up, even in your old age, you can challenge God, you don't. And the rabbis in that story of the oven are trying to remind us all, post temple, post the destruction, the exile, it's in our hands. It's not in God's. And they use, those words as a reminder. Wait a minute. We have the choice and the freedom and the liberty to make those choices. And did Avraham really make the right choice? That's a question. And for some, they feel he is the model of righteousness because he just did what he was asked and told. Not even asked, was told. Take your son. It's not a question. It's an order. And he follows it. Unlike his earlier life, when he was willing to challenge. The other issue that I raised had to do with trials and tests. And that this was like the 10th test. And of course, the big question is, did he pass it? Did he fail it? Did he sort of pass it and get a C grade or an A plus, depending on your point of view? And in relating to the story, we all, at some point in our lives, are faced with difficulty, with trials and tribulations, with tests in our lives. And the question is, how do we view them? How do we respond to them? What are the choices we make? it's something I'm trying to bring it to kind of a human level, and for all of us in our lives, how do we face the trials? According to the commentary, and in Talmud, it says that some of the things we suffer are because of God loving us. So that's a strange thing to understand, that we suffer because God loves us. But then the question is some of our suffering and trials really to teach us something? If we view them as doorways into learning more about ourselves, maybe it is a gift. Maybe some of the most horrific things we have to face or continue to face are really challenges of how the choices we make and how we handle them. And we get the gift of that possibility, as it was said earlier by Nechama Leibowitz, as a way to refine our souls, to make us better, to make us stronger. I'm not giving you answers. I'm presenting ways of viewing and thinking and how to find something in this story that makes sense for us. And Maya, you want to say something, and then I want to go into a quiet moment for all of us to answer our own questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I just, while you were saying and recapping all these things, right, it did occur to me that Abraham went through all this difficult, trying time by himself, without his wife, right? And we all know when the difficult time comes, we have to get the support from the family, friends. No one really can go through the hard time by himself without, and keep his sanity. That just occurred. That's just occurred to me while you were.
Maya, it's a very interesting comment. But here's the thing: she's alive. She's alive and well. Right. God speaks only to him, and he chooses. Now, you remember when he's told in the same portion, send Hagar and her son out? What does God say? Talk to Sarah, listen to Sarah. He goes to Sarah. And it's like God, what God is saying basically is what she said, do it. So the question is here. He doesn't check it out with the wife. He doesn't even acknowledge in some ways that Sarah's the mother. I'm taking not only my son, it's her son too. So I'm glad you went there. It's a beautiful thought. He makes the choice of doing it alone and moving on that trajectory, and she dies right after, because the pain of it, at least as Midrash describes it, when she hears about it, is she can't go on living. So it's so interesting. He chooses not to go to Sarah. God doesn't say, go check it out with her first, or do whatever she says. She's the one that gave birth to him at the ripe old age of 90 or something. So you're right. Going through difficulty, we need support and family. And in this moment, he chooses to do it all alone. That's a choice, but excellent to point out.
And that, like I mentioned, so it seems like he became some kind of insane from just holding it himself, and maybe just not being able to share the heaviness of
the weight of it,
the task, the weight of it.
Yes.
Maybe, So basically what I'm getting is all the, I would say, all the challenges that I had in life, I had my family who supported me and who shared the weight, and many others. And that's how I kept my sanity, right? Yeah. So that's what it comes to.
Well, I love what you said. You said that somehow it made him crazy. That's such an interesting view. I don't know that anybody has challenged his mental capacity at his ripe old age to make that decision, to just go ahead and do it, to walk forward without a thought, without checking it out with his wife, his partner. It's very interesting. Thank you for that idea that maybe in the anxiety and the stress of it all, but that's not how it's pictured. It's pictured, though there are these little pieces that come up, that Satan comes in a way to test him even further, that there's a river that flows in that in their passage, their 3-day journey, maybe to even wake him up and stop him, but it doesn't. It doesn't stop him. He goes right up there to that moment with the knife. There is no sense of him questioning at any moment. What am I doing? Is this okay? God, you really want me to do this? So, yeah, thank you. Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, you talk about, relationships. I mean, all through the stories that we read, Sarah has gone with him on these journeys.
Mhm.
She pretended to be his sister. She did whatever he told her. So maybe that was part of their relationship, was that she was the compliant one. And at this point, he didn't want to have an argument with her. He didn't want to have a discussion with her. He didn't want to give her an opportunity to speak
Yeah.
up, to change his mind, because he was going to do this.
That's fascinating. He avoided going to her because he didn't want to have to deal with it. That's an interesting perspective. I don't want to say she's compliant all the time, because in some ways the major challenge was, in the moment of his birth, and then what they describe as the two brothers kind of having fun together. For some, it was sexual, for some, it was about power, that she picked up on something. I'm not saying it's accurate, but she immediately felt that she had to get that kid out of the house because it wasn't safe for her son, and basically tells Avraham, you send the woman and her son, Hagar, and Ishmael, and you get them out of here. And God basically says, do what she says. So she wasn't compliant truly, but in this moment, she's not present, or at least that we know of. And maybe new kind of midrash comes out of this to be written about his own internal conflict about, should I go talk to her? It's her son too. He doesn't even say that to God. Wait a minute, my son? He's our son.
Right.
He's the son of our old age. But God talks to him as if he belongs to him. That in and of itself is interesting, right? So, cognizant of time, I want to invite us to mute. We're all going to mute. We're going to take a moment of silence and to go to that place to think about these questions. Is this really a moment, a teachable moment of what not to do or what to do? The issue of boundaries. Do we have boundaries in relationship to what's expected of us? And is there a point where it goes too far and we need to say no? There was something else that I wanted to share. Oh, trial. And to go in for yourself about your own trials and tribulations. Is there a moment in which you can see it as something, as a gift from the Holy One, as a loving gift, because it gives us an opportunity to really see the opportunities? Is it a learning opportunity? Is it a way to grow, get better, redo our lives? Trials and tribulations, which we all have at different times, do they have a purpose? And therefore, is it really a loving gesture? So, Robin, would you please mute? I'm going to mute. We're going to sit together and invite anyone who sees this after we've done it to take a moment to respond to those questions and see where it takes you. And then I will ring and we'll stop. Thank you for coming, being present, and sharing this soaking up of Torah that we did together, and for your input and sharing. Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to stop the